Hello and welcome to another Music Ally Focus with me, Music Ally's editor Joe Sparrow, and we're about to chat to Vickie Nauman, who's founder of music consultancy CrossBorderWorks. Now, Vickie has recently worked on a notable music metaverse project, which involved the licensing of 20 of superstar DJ David Guetta's songs for an event where he, via his virtual avatar, DJ'd in Roblox earlier this year. So we want to talk to Vickie about licensing music, which is something that's tricky enough in normal circumstances, in the metaverse. This, therefore, is another show in our series that digs into the burgeoning Web3 space's new concepts, the ideas and conventions, and figure out how they connect to the music business. As a reminder, Web3 is a kind of technological sea change in how we use the internet, with a wave of new, often complex technologies related to the crypto, decentralized, and NFT space, and it encompasses as well the metaverse, amongst other things. And that's what we're talking to Vickie about today. That's coming along in just a minute. Now, what is this Focus podcast? Well, Music Ally provides an analysis-rich guide to the music business, and each of these Music Ally Focus episodes analyzes one meaningful music business story at a time, in focus, if you see where I'm going with that. Now, this podcast is also going to be quick. It should take about the same amount of time as it took Ashrita Furman to run a mile whilst spinning a whip top. That was in 25 minutes and 13 seconds, which was achieved in Turkey in 2006. Now, talking of spinning things for a living, David Guetta is probably the most famous DJ on the planet, and having DJ'd in his own Ibizan club, on top of skyscrapers, in memes, and at giant EDM festivals full of gurning, neon-clad ravers, his tireless quest for finding new places to DJ has finally landed him a gig in the metaverse. That happened in February, and it meant that a set of his songs had to be cleared for use in Roblox. These are complicated steps into new territory, and Vickie Nauman was the person tasked to do it. So we wanted to find out what she learned along the way. So let's talk to Vickie now. So we're very happy to welcome Vickie Nauman, founder of music consultancy CrossBorderWorks, to the podcast. Hi, Vickie. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Now, Vickie has recently worked on a notable metaverse project on the music licensing component for an appearance David Guetta made, DJing as his virtual self within the Roblox ecosystem in early February. And Vickie, you worked on music licensing for 20 of David Guetta's songs, and we'll dig into that in a moment. So we wanted to talk to Vickie about the intricacies of licensing music for the metaverse, which is a new space where things sort of work the same, but sort of work differently. So perhaps to start us off, can you tell us about this project with David Guetta and what you had to do in sort of specific terms of, what did you need to do, and what obstacles did you overcome that were perhaps unique when doing this for the metaverse?
Yeah, so I was really thrilled to do this project because I've been studying and looking at everything that's emerging, new technologies, and how Web3 is starting to come together with, and I encapsulate the metaverse, virtual world, NFTs, blockchain, crypto, AR, VR, immersive experiences. There's a lot of things in that when we bundle in Web3, which I believe is going to be a really exciting reinvention of the internet, kind of like it was maybe 1999 to 2001, where a lot of the rules were changing, the systems, I think we are going to have a lot more potential for empowerment of both creators as well as hopefully end users who may have a little bit more control over their data. We'll see about all of that, but I think the potential is there. So for this project with David Guetta, I was actually representing Warner Music, and they really want to create a pipeline for their artists into the metaverse and into some of these emerging technologies, which I love. Very, very supportive of that. And so David's team was very involved in the project, and he came up with the set list. And usually what I do is, whenever I start a project like this, I scope out, okay, what is the functionality? Do we really need sync licenses? Is it embedded in the experience? What set of rights? And then how do we structure those rights? And For this, we wanted to make it, we knew that it was a short-lived event. It was really only up for 3 days. Then we wanted to, we recognized right away, I did some research on the ownership and found that there were an inordinate number of writers and contributors on this, a couple of split masters and, an average of 7 writers per song. And there were also, it almost felt like I was in some sort of a parallel experience because I started looking at it and it had everything: a new song where the splits hadn't been sorted, non-society writers who were not part of any kind of collection society, writers who were not signed to any kind of publishing administrator, and then shared masters and samples and the whole thing. And so it was a really, really complex set of songs. And, we see that in electronic music a lot. But what I did is I just really mapped the whole thing out. And there were a lot of things that were not registered in any system out there. So I just went old school and started finding writers on social media and searching and doing Google, deep searches and contacting their companies.
You sort of entered your own metaverse of licensing, tortuous licensing processes. Yeah, I'm going to put a link to this project, the David Guetta and Roblox project, so you can see this when you finish listening to the podcast. So obviously that sounds like an interesting and complicated experience. But like you say, traditional techniques of going and licensing things. Let's talk about this in the structural sense of how the existing music industry is sort of set up to interact with a space like the metaverse, because the metaverse is clearly different in that it's experiential in a different way. It connects fans and artists in a different way. It connects users with music in different ways, and the expectation of the users and how music interacts with them is very different, and then of course from the artist end as well. So as you went down that labyrinth of licensing, did you have any idea of how the industry is currently set up and how that rubs up against the metaverse and what changes there might be needed?
Absolutely. I mean, the way the industry works now is we have a handful of existing models where we have, if it's radio, there's one type of license regime, mostly statutory. If it's on-demand streaming, which is what we have, Spotify and Apple Music, there's a structure around that. If it's synchronization for games, films, TV, then there's a specific structure around that. And then we have platforms like TikTok and YouTube and Triller, and these are kind of like they've had to create their own model, kind of a combination of licensing and safe harbor. What I'm seeing in the metaverse is much more fragmentation, many more companies lining up with venture capital behind them that are building systems, tools, architecture that is designed so that creators and artists and musical artists as a subset of creators can engage directly in these platforms, so that you can come to the table in any of these new emerging platforms and technologies and say, wow, I can figure out how to build a community around my art. I can create an NFT. I can go live in the metaverse in a concert. I can do that directly. I don't necessarily need to have an entire entourage around myself. And so this is great for the young and upcoming artists who control everything, who are self-releasing, they own the master and the publishing. But we have a very, very fragmented way that people are creating music, especially pop music, hip hop, and electronic music, where there can be 10 writers on every song, and those can be from 10 different publishers. And the master recording can have a shared master or samples in it. And it's extremely difficult to imagine how an artist who is in that existing ecosystem can just go and be nimble in the metaverse and be able to spin up all sorts of self-initiated activities. And so I think that, I am hoping that everything in the metaverse does not end up being, UGC, and that everything is safe harbor and people are uploading things and it gets very messy. I really want to try to create a bridge between this existing world and the metaverse so that artists, labels, and even songwriters who are interested in doing initiatives, that they have systems and they have capabilities of being able to do that. But it's a different paradigm from catalogs, which is how the industry operates now.
You made an interesting point there about how there is a sort of separation emerging of artists who have maybe emerged and have developed in I'm not going to say the old industry, but the industry around where ownership is different, the traditional industry, and then this new stream of artists who are not necessarily all emerging artists. There are ones who are well established, but they own everything. They're very direct to fan, and they're controlling their situation. Do you think that latter group, the ones who are in more control, if you like, have more opportunity in the metaverse, or is it equally accessible to the David Guettas of this world, who have these big complicated things?
I think it will be equally accessible, but I think that that the path, there's a few more mountains that have to be climbed if you are a David Guetta and you are an established artist and you have an army of rights holders that are associated with every song than it is for those that control everything. I think there's a rub in here in that most of the fan activity and the money is in the traditional industry. And we will see, I firmly believe that we will see a peeling off of this, younger crowd, the artists who control everything of all stages of their careers, and they will be able to light up experiences much more quickly and much earlier in the metaverse than the traditional industry will.
All right, just to jump in halfway here, if you're finding this useful and you want more of this kind of in-depth news and trusted contextual analysis waiting for you in your inbox every morning, as well as having access to all of Music Ally's industry-leading reports, head on over to musically.com/subscribe. If you work for an indie label, you're an artist manager, you're an employee of a CMO or publisher, you might be eligible for one of our sponsored complimentary subscriptions as well. So head over to musically.com/subscribe and find out more. All right, let's go back over to Vickie. Now, one of the really interesting things about the metaverse is that it is not just a place for people to go and visit and experience things. It's also a big part of the user base is makers, people building things, those experiences, whether they are hobbyists, DIY people, or big companies. And that is an inherent part of it. It's built like a playground. They're building things and changing things and experiencing them. And those makers inherently expect the creative elements that they're building with, like 3D elements, visual 3D elements, to be easily available to build the things they want. So they're willing to go and pay for them and buy these things, but they want them to be, okay, I'll buy it easily, I'm going to go and use it, and then I'm not going to have to worry about any further sort of complications around it after that. Now, music traditionally has been a little bit more complicated for various reasons. So do they expect music to be similarly easy to use? Like Lego blocks. I want to buy this song to use, and it's going to go in there, and that I want it to be easy to buy, I want it to be affordable, and I want to be able to go and do what I want with it. And is the industry ready for that?
Well, I think a lot of these platforms are starting to think that way. And I spoke at an event in November called AWE, which is this augmented world. It was in Santa Clara, amazing event. And I got to meet so many companies that were building tools, systems, metaverse, all sorts of different platforms. And so I was exposed to this, and it was palpable how much they were seeing creators of all kinds, people who are musical creators, people who are not musical creators, that they see these tools that are being built as really enabling capabilities that these creators can take those tools and pull the technology in a direction in which they want to express their art, which is really exciting. And I feel like that is so perfectly positioned for music if we decouple that from the rights. And because artists are always the ones that are first to embrace these new technologies. They're always, as an industry, we often have a lot of resistance, but the artists themselves, if it's a new way for them to express themselves and integrate something into their art and their creativity, they're absolutely, going to be, the first in line to do it. So I feel like music is really, really well positioned for that. But the, musicians are very well positioned for that. But the industry is not necessarily very well positioned for it, because I do not see any kind of real interest in any of these metaverse type platforms in having 60 million songs and having full catalogs in the same way that we think of Spotify and Apple Music and Pandora and these really broad-based, even TikTok, where everyone has access to everything. I think that there's a different philosophy, and it's really around, individual artists and individual creators, really leading the charge in the metaverse. And I think that poses some really serious challenges, not only around rights, but because that's artist name and likeness. And so this isn't necessarily something that a label can just spin up without having some sort of involvement by the artist. And so, so it opens up a little bit of a, of a conundrum. And I'm really encouraging artists and labels who want to explore this to really start examining, which artists in their rosters, because it won't be all of them. This probably won't be legacy artists who want to go and do a set in the metaverse, but legacy artists might be really great for some NFTs for collectability. But I think there's a segmentation that has to happen between all of the different artists, not so much albums, which is also how labels are often structured, is around albums, but around artists who represent a really wide repertoire that may cross multiple labels and possibly hundreds of publishers. Which of those artists are right, and who wants to play, and then let's build a bridge for that.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because it feels like not just here in the metaverse, but there's a sort of rapid stratification of how different artists and different music should be used in different ways, and it is not one size fit all now. So just to take the metaverse for instance, that yes, some artists are suitable for doing shows in the metaverse where you can go and participate, and those are probably going to be big name artists. But then at the same time, you've got these makers who want to go out and make unique little experiences for their friends or for a small community or a smallish community, and they just want to plug in music and make it fit into this thing they're making. And that's going to be a different group of artists, probably with different sort of licensing deals, and those artists will be happy for creators to take their music and bend it and shape it and fit it into stuff. And we're starting to see that settle out. And I guess is that the sort of nature of the challenge that rights holders need to broach?
Absolutely. I think you put it really, really well and succinctly. And I think it's a double-edged sword, because I feel like when we look at the landscape now, on-demand streaming it's a volume-based business. If you are a niche artist and you have music and you have loyal fans all over the world, but your music is maybe not something that is played on repeat, and it isn't in all the big playlists and doesn't have, hundreds of millions of streams, then I would argue, the one size fits all of what we have now of on-demand streaming services doesn't necessarily work for everyone. And so I think that this is an enormous opportunity for us to create micro communities that have popped up in the global ecosystem, the global listening experience of on-demand streaming, but take those communities and move them into areas where the fans and the artists are no longer just, they're no longer just an audience performing for a fan, but maybe there's a community. Maybe there is a micro subscription to individual artists. There's going to be so many different ways. And I'm really hopeful that this will enable artists who are not necessarily ever going to fit into structures that are built for the biggest Billboard charting artists, that it might really open up opportunities for them to have niche fans, niche followings, and be able to really monetize them and connect with them more meaningfully.
Yes, fascinating period we're entering into now. And the metaverse seems like an inevitable part of our future technology and media consumption mix, however it shakes out and however we experience it. The opportunities are clearly infinite, for good and for bad. But as you look ahead, from your perspective, what particular uses of music are you looking forward to that could really only happen in the metaverse?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, I feel like I put it into a few categories. I do feel like there's something there with NFTs and music. And I think it's a combination. I think it's a combination of collectability. Music is, we already have a long history of people wanting to collect things, t-shirts, colored vinyl, whatnot. So I think there's an interest around collectability. There's also interest and a good fit around access, so that if someone is, buys an NFT, that they become, part of a perpetual community where it's not just an email address. It's something, it's something that is more closely connected to an artist. So I think there's something there. I think we're going to go through probably a few years of crashes and fraud and all sorts of problems in the crypto and NFT world, in the same way we did in 2000 and 2001 with all of the internet, the first .com companies that crashed and burned. We're going to go through that, but I think what will emerge is something really high potential for music in NFTs. I also think in the virtual worlds, I think there's enormous opportunity there for performances of all kinds. And, we currently have, Roblox, which is just killing it with the really young demographic and avatars. But I foresee, we already have, Sandbox and Decentraland and, and of course, the, existing gaming companies that kind of have virtual world elements to it. I think we'll have much more diversity of what that looks like for artists to be performing in front of fans in virtual worlds. And then I also think that there's a, I don't know whether it's DAOs or, what other kinds of communities there will emerge. But I think that I don't see any artists moving off of the broad platforms of Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and all of the existing social media. But I think there is going to be a really good opportunity for artists to migrate a subset of their fans, probably their most loyal fans and the people who really want to have a closer relationship, and bring those into smaller platforms where they're able to, to monetize, to share more things with their fans, to let the fans engage with each other. And I'm seeing a lot of early indications. And I consider all of these things that I've talked about to be artist-centric models. And I'm very, very highly invested in this because I think I have 6 different projects right now that are all artist-centric models. And they're a mix of things that are kind of 2.0 and Web 3.0. And they require a completely different way of framing out a model of, how do you divide the pie when something is artist-led? How do you in all the rights holders? How do you set up infrastructure to be able to pay everyone in artist-centric models? And I think it's an enormous opportunity for us to reimagine what this could look like. And I see no reason at all why in all of these artist-centric models, labels, publishers, artists, performing rights organizations can all be compensated fairly. But it's a difference in that the artist is at the center of it as opposed to a catalog. And so I am extremely bullish about this and really excited about it. And I love working with artist teams and labels who also see this opportunity because there's room for everyone. And we now have, our systems are not perfect by any measure, and publishing is really fragmented. So that is really, really complicated. But I think, for those that are really being forward thinking, I think everyone sees that there's a game-changing opportunity that's emerging for artist-led initiatives that's going to lead right into Web3, and I'm all over it.
Yes, exciting times, and we'll see what happens when it all shakes out. But there is some shaking to be
for sure
to take place for sure. But yeah, absolutely fascinating stuff. So if people have been listening to this, Vickie, and they're thinking, oh, actually, yeah, I want a piece of that, and maybe you can help me. How can they best contact you or see what you're doing?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm not hard to find. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can also on my look at my website, CrossBorderWorks. And there's a contact me page there. So send me your information. I'm happy. I love talking to people who want to do something meaningful in the space. And I'm now that we're opening up and we're starting to go to industry events again, you can find me there.
So Vickie of CrossBorderWorks, Vickie Nauman, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed the conversation.
So big thanks again to Vickie Nauman, her second appearance on the Focus podcast, and we're always glad to have her. And there are some links peppered around this podcast where you can go and check out some of Vickie's work and as well experience some of David Guetta's Roblox set in video form. And if you found that useful, please share the podcast on with someone else who you think will get something out of it. And if you want to get in touch with me, please do. It's joe@musically.com. That's joe@musically.com. We also have a free weekly email called The Knowledge, which, as the name suggests, rounds up bits and pieces of the best analysis, news, marketing insight, and skills from Music Ally every week. So sign up and impress your friends. Links are in the description of this podcast, as always. So thanks for joining us again here on Music Ally Focus. And that's it from me, Joe Sparrow, Music Ally's editor. Until next time, farewell.